you know, while theoretically you could write a great historical and also win the best dagger, the gold dagger, it's not likely. You know, it does in fact pigeonhole things, just in the way we're talking about. I have a really mixed reaction to it, and part of that is because there's money attached to all of these. In the American, which is the Edgar Allan Poe Awards, you get a little sort of cheesy statue, you know, of Poe with a kind of blue whatever and black eyes and all. It's just, but it's all about prestige. There's no money. You just get to take home the statue. But in England, in order to make a splash and for various things, there's actually a significant cash award that goes with all of these things. And that's true of other British literary prizes, if you think about it. The Booker Prize, Costa Award, all that stuff. So it's a real different way of, you know, looking. But anyway, your silver dagger was a very prestigious thing for 40 words.
Yeah, it was great. I was completely knocked out by it. It was a total surprise, and I was absolutely delighted. It was great. So
your characters tell us a little bit about who they are.
Well, John Cardinal came about because I stole an idea from Graham Greene. When he was being interviewed about the heart of the matter decades ago, back in the 50s, this would have been, he said that he had the idea of, he wanted to write a novel about a policeman who was under investigation and you didn't know who the investigator was. And I thought, that's a good idea for a novel, but he didn't in fact use it. That wasn't what Heart of the Matter ended up being at all. But I took that idea away for decades. I thought, he didn't use it, I may use it. And eventually when I decided I wanted to write a detective novel, I thought that would be a great one to do. And so a lot of things followed from that. What type of crime would he be investigated for? What would he be guilty or not? How guilty, etc., etc. What kind of character would this be? And how would you balance his guilt against other qualities? And a lot of things follow from that. So I have him guilty of an all but victimless crime, and it's many years in the past, and he's felt hideously guilty about it ever since, and he did it for the best motives, if that's possible. And eventually he does everything he can to right it, to right the wrong that he did. But to balance that off, I thought, well, what are the qualities I most admire in people? And loyalty is one of them. And so I thought, well, how do I show that he's really loyal? So I gave him a really difficult wife.
You did?
Yes.
With a difficult disease.
Yes, she has bipolar disorder, Catherine. And in the first book, 40 Words for Sorrow, she's hospitalized and can't even speak because she's so depressed. And by the end of the book, she comes around and she's out of hospital. Well, that's the state she's in when we meet her. Cardinal, despite this very difficult relationship at home, is partnered with Lise Delorme, a younger French-Canadian policewoman who's fairly new in the detective department. And she's very attractive and likes him, but in the first book she's also investigating him. So it's a little tense, to say the least. So that was the beginnings of it, and I had always admired one of the most I think the two most unforgettable mysteries, crime books that I've read would be, for me, Gorky Park and probably Silence of the Lambs. And both of them have just a tremendous sense of place. Gorky Park, I mean, you never forget the Moscow of Gorky Park. And Thomas Harris, it isn't so much the physical location as the institution.
Right.
I mean, as soon as he wrote that book, every author in the world was going to visit the FBI and their training center and so on, because he had just brought that so much to life. And so I wanted to do something where the setting would be really, really vivid. And at first I thought of New York because I was living there and I knew it very, very well. And I thought I could really do a job with it. But then I thought, yeah, but a lot of people have done a great job with New York.
Right.
And I thought, what could I do that other people can't do? And so I thought of Northern Ontario, where I grew up. And it had become more and more exotic to me the longer I lived away from it. And I thought that I could see it from that distance we were talking about before.
Right.
It was amplified 100-fold after living in New York for a couple of decades. I mean, I'd go back and see the 4 feet of snow and everything frozen and the bleakness of the place and the beauty of it, the stark beauty of it. And I thought I could really do something with that. So that was the beginnings of the of the thing.
It's a terrific landscape for a crime novel because it's full of contrasts and full of
Yeah.
danger.
Yeah.
You know, the
It's
extremes of the
harsh.
weather.
Yeah.
Yeah, very. It's a dangerous place. You can die accidentally with, you know, in a way that's not possible in more temperate San Diego. It's kind of hard to imagine, you know.
Yeah, no, you walk 300 yards into the forest there, and if you get lost, I mean, you could die very, very easily.
It also, I think that some of the really, mostly in crime fiction, most of the really great series, the things that you remember, the landscape, the culture of the book, probably is the thing that readers identify with the most.
It really stays with you.
Vivid.
It's funny when a previous agent of mine sent 40 Words of Sorrow around to 16 publishing houses in the States, and it got turned down by all of them. And 6 of them cited the Canadian setting as being a reason they didn't want to publish it. They said, you know, it's not, people won't be interested in a Canadian setting, which I thought would be news to Margaret Atwood, but, you know.
You were just slightly ahead of your time there, because now they're all rushing to publish, you know, Henning Mankell, you've already mentioned.
Yeah.
Now there is actually this kind of, there was kind of like a gold rush after things like Indian tribes or
Tony
historical
Hillerman,
periods, if you were, 'cause there was a huge wave of historical crime fiction in the 90s, and it was like people were staking out, you know, if not centuries, decades and places. And I think recently what we've seen, certainly since 9/11, has been that move towards other countries. There's a much more of a welcome now for books set outside the United States and places that before 9/11 publishers didn't think that readers would go. But curiously,
I think part of the reason for that may also be the phenomenal success of shows like Law and Order, which has been running what, for 16, 17 years now.
That's
around that, and CSI, which hasn't been running so long, but also has 3 different versions running. So you look at the top 10 shows, and 6 of them are taken up by these two crime shows. And so people are seeing the American law enforcement, forensic, judicial system many times a week. So, you know, a novel set, a crime or investigative novel set in the States has to be really unique for it to compete with those shows, I think. And whereas if you get some outside of that, then you can deal with different stuff. In a way, I think it's good. People often ask, well, is it getting harder to come up with cool forensic stuff that that people will really like? And on the one hand, that's true. Yeah, you can't compete with a show like CSI in terms of getting the hot stuff, because they have several professionals on call. They just pick up the phone and say, how would they do this? And so, or what's the latest on this? And they'll just tell them, you know. And plus they have a weekly schedule, not a yearly one, like a novelist. So in a way, I think it's good, because it means that the novels have to get into other stuff, which for me is my interest anyway. I like the forensic stuff, but I'm much more interested in the psychology. And I think most authors are turning more to the psychology now than the forensics, except for the ones who actually are coroners and medical examiners and so on.
That's a really good point. The other thing is, too, if you're somewhere like Thunder Bay, you can disable technology. I mean, it's a place where you could truly, you know, make cell phones not work or trap people in blizzards and other stuff, so that you can, even while acknowledging that technology is available, unlike, let's say, the Sue Grafton approach, which is to keep Kinsey in the 1980s before, I mean, she's still there, you know, all these books in, deliberately in order to avoid this problem. But you've got lots of opportunities in Thunder Bay just to kind of shut it down. Or they just, I mean, they have to, when a detective is working on a murder in North Bay or Algonquin Bay, they have to, there's nothing up there in terms of forensics. They have a coroner system, which is just volunteer doctors, and they do it on a rotating basis. When they do it for 3 or 6 months at a time, they come up and do it and just register if it looks like foul play or not, and make a finding on that, and that determines whether a case is open. But they don't do the autopsies or stuff like that. That's all done in Toronto. This is 250 miles away, so that causes problems for the cops. And in a way, it's good, because it means you can't solve it in 10 minutes, and you get time to develop other threads of the story while they're waiting for the DNA results to come back, you know, minimum 10 days later. I'm sorry, I keep calling it Thunder Bay. I'm doomed to call it Thunder Bay.
People do that. They call North Bay Thunder Bay as well as my fictional version.